Some responses to the opening few minutes of the recent Jordan Peterson discussion with Richard Dawkins. One bit of total rubbish was the continued nonsense on the free speech nihilism, which has become a big feature of right-wing politics, which Peterson has become an avatar of. I'm aware that he's also capable of rational analysis, which in some way transcends party politics, and I'm aware that he also continuously, in this sort of Edward Said way, against the obvious public opinion that he's a right-wing type, continuously tries to uphold his position. You know, like Edward Said said, we Palestinians constantly have to fight for our narrative, whereas the other side, it says, though, just in a matter of course, their side is supreme. That's somewhat undermined by his antagonism towards these tests which determine bias, which I think are actually accurate, although he may be correct that it's useless to put people into training if that can't be trained out of one because it's part of one's ingrained personality. My suggestions on this issue are: one, we should make a principled division in all discussion of issues of free speech concerning issues which are something like loud noises, so issues of disturbances in public. So there's many things which are illegal, positively illegal to do in public, simply because they would make life for one's fellow citizens less worth living. So our aim in coming to a settlement on free speech is to decide what a life worthy of a free man is. I use the term man indifferently to mean a human being. The other side of free speech are those things which have a direct and clear bearing on political issues, and they can be summed up by Kant's essay on what is enlightenment, where he says one should, in one's daily, what he calls the private dealings, in one's daily life, one should go along with whatever the organization one is in, what rules they have. So the university has a positive rule that says you can't say certain things. For instance, on Avital Ronell ran afoul of that recently in the university in New York, where she got in trouble for some sexual harassment. There's many things which are one is positively enjoined not to say at risk of legal sanction. That's completely normal, and it exists, and it's completely impossible that wouldn't exist. So it's totally absurd, Peterson's claim that this is something new and unusual. Questions on the other side, Kant says, of somebody who has a certain expertise on a subject, and then says, as a public expert, not speaking as themselves as a private or idiosyncratic individual in an idiosyncratic situation, but as a public expert claiming to present knowledge, not necessarily science in the current understanding of experimental science, but knowledge in some sense. Knowledge and science are the same thing, except that science get individuated by the current public understanding at any given time. or knowledge. The word knowledge also get individuated like that. But basically, knowledge and science say the same thing. So somebody who claims to have knowledge worthy of the public, which can direct policy, public policy, should not be curtailed in presenting this knowledge to the public. That's the high form, I almost say the angelic form of free speech. So in other words, it means you could get a lot of, as we do, people paid for by Exxon or by corporations out of think tanks to present in a very intellectually thick way cases which are actually interested cases and private, trying to manipulate people towards some private interest. So you get the problem that you make legal telling lies. You make legal interested parties coming forward with what are at bottom lies for self-interested reasons by opening the door of enlightenment or Aufklärung in Kant's sense. Now, on the other side, what Kant didn't treat with, because Kant naively believed that the people were so solidly encased within Christian mores that the issue would never come up. On the other side, there's all these issues of what are the innumerable cases where we're positively legally enjoined not to say things because we'll be arrested if we do say them. For instance, I mean, the simplest analogy of that is just shouting at somebody, for instance, on the public street. So that's illegal. That's a form of assault. That's a form of, I don't know what kind of assault, third-degree assault or something like that. Separating assault from actual physical battery. There's many cases like that up until the 60s, and then even later with George Carlin's 7 words you can't say on TV were profanity. Of course, all the old settlement on what was profane speech, what was considered expletives, what you couldn't say. The 7 words you can't say on television, I think it was, the routine was called. But I just say that as a matter of orientation towards this general issue of overthrowing Christian norms, which were taken for granted by Kant, so that during the Enlightenment, during the flourishing of classical liberalism, the liberalism which was, Carl Schmitt later said, was a kind of fig leaf or a fiction, which doesn't really exist, because there's always this political struggle going on, even if it's veiled by layers of people like Jordan Peterson talking a lot of rubbish about, oh, nothing like this ever existed before. But of course, it's always existed, and legal prohibitions on speech have always existed. And the new style of free speech, nihilism, is very flimsy, but people can't see through it. What can you do? So, I mean, I'm talking about people like Tucker Carlson and so on. Oh, we can, but I think part of that issue would be sorted out easily by simply distinguishing what you want the atmosphere when you're walking down a public sidewalk to be, what you want to be forbidden in those circumstances. That's one issue. And then there's this other issue on who are the people who are serious-minded in bringing forward something that could be of use for the public and should be heard, and what are the protections offered to them. And then that would sort of link up to issues of the private universities and all the problems with tenure. And but of course, then we would rapidly see that no professor ever has thought that, I mean, outside of paleoconservatism and Charles Murray maybe, but even then, I don't know that they always present themselves as saying, I, as a professor, have the right to have political views and push them on my students. I don't think that's what they ever say. I think what they say is, as a political scientist, I'm presenting this in conjoined effort with a biologists who know something about DNA who are presenting a certain case. They present themselves more in this Kantian light of presenting a scientific case rather than a political case. That's where one would want to set some principle, clear, bright line orientation on when we're dealing with sheer political speech and when we're dealing with, on the other hand, something that seems like pure experimental science, and whether those two things can be divided. Then you get towards the Leo Strauss problems of fact-value distinction and so forth. But at least then, out of the ordinary political scuffle, we would then be pointed and oriented towards the more menacing problems, towards the rise of a kind of what science means as the settlement on knowledge when it's set off against values. Okay, so the other issue that I noticed, if I have time in this video, I always get cut off, was this question of starting from the biological human being in the sense of even bringing it towards the hollowing out of Christ. This is misunderstood here because the hollowing out of Christ has to do with with the ideas, with the not with the physical body in the sense of pressure, in the sense of he gave the example of a bird's wings, saying the flapping of a bird's wings would you could infer from the study of that physiology, the atmosphere, the environment around it. And then he analogized that on the coming of Christ and regarding Christ as an animal body, and whether we can derive out of this kenosis or hollowing out of the will something similar. I didn't listen to the whole rest of what he was saying, but it struck me right away that this kind of analysis is an occasion for juxtaposing the Greek conception of an animal, which also is able to speak and therefore has intellect, with Dasein. The distinction here is in Dasein, what we're primarily talking about is the presence of the future within what would be taken there as the total universe, as the physical universe. The close analysis of this we can see in Heidegger's lecture from the 1920s, where he says that Bergson has not seen what Einstein did. What Einstein did with physics, which is the basis, which gives us sort of the light for how we're understanding biology in these kind of conversations, is that he's left out the future. So Dasein is a concept which tries to show that the future is here, so that we're already inclining towards something. As a matter of orientation, when we have facts and values, the values are really agendas. So the values point us towards the future. Seen in this sort of artificial way of describing facts and values, Dasein is then this bringing back of the values or the agendas or the future into reality where it belongs, instead of trying to say that there's a factual physics account, and then alongside that there's this magical fable or fairy tale of the people who believe in divinity or who believe in something else. So Dasein tries to overcome the nihilism which is inherent in a factual account, which has its basics in physics based on Galileo's starting out with the thought experiment about the vacuum, about the inertial vacuum, which then corresponds to the Cartesian grid to extension. And Kant tried to overcome this with his antinomies by thinking of the thing in itself on the one side and the Cartesian world extended subject on the other, and trying to bring them together. Dasein is another attempt in that sort of Alpha Boon view, but it involves a different approach and claims to have drawn back prior to either the agenda or the phenomena, either the fact or the value, either the physics and the, it tends to draw, it claims to, how does it called, the phenomena and on the other side, the truth in Nietzsche's terms, Tatsache and Wirklichkeit in Nietzsche's terms. It says there's this pre-ground from which we can, of concern, which we can then see concern looking in both directions. That being vague, nonetheless, we get some orientation to see why the study of Heidegger, which is very dense and theoretical, and when you have only, say, 70%, 80% understanding of it, you can't present it in an ordinary vernacular way that's at all cogent or compelling, so that you're required to spend a long time, as it were, learning it, like learning a language. And there must be a certain orientation that gives you a motivation to do that. So that's the motivation, overcoming this nihilism, which then links us back to many problems, including these political problems, which we were discussing in the first part.